I really miss the taste of locally grown apples, and there is no apple orchard within any reasonable distance of where I live now. And I don't know about you, but I don't have the backyard space to spare for a couple of fully grown apple trees. So for a while, I thought that homegrown apples were going to be out of reach for me. Or so I thought, because there's espalier. And if you don't know what espalier is, it's simply the art of training a fruit tree to stay small and grow flat against a wall or a fence or a trellis of some kind. And it's not as intimidating as it seems. So keep watching and I'll walk you through exactly how to set up a brand new apple espalier and how to care for it all the way through its first season. The first step before you even build anything is to choose the right apple trees. For espalier, you really need to find a spur-bearing apple tree rather than a tip-bearing. The good thing is there are thousands of spur-bearing apple varieties or partially spur-bearing. And all this means is that the apples themselves grow on these short little stubby spurs, is what they're called, along the main branches of the tree. So for espalier, when you train just these few branches along the wires, you'll have lots of apples growing in clusters, and each of those spurs will bear apples for many, many years. Certain apple varieties are what's called tip-bearing, and those will grow more at the ends of branches, and that's less ideal for espalier because you're limiting the number of branches, and so you'll get less apples. The two trees I've chosen for my espalier apple trees are Anna and Einschiemer. And these are both low chill apple varieties that only need like 300 to 400 chill hours in order to bear fruit, which is perfect for my hot climate, and we have really mild winters here. So they can withstand the summer heat that we get, but then get enough chill hours to bear a good crop of fruit. Most apple trees do need a pollinating partner. Einschiemer is self-pollinating, which is great, but it's going to bear a much better crop if I pair it with another tree, which is why I've chosen Anna. They're also just two different flavors of apples. Anna absolutely has to have a pollination partner. So when you're choosing apple trees for espalier, make sure that the trees you choose bloom right around the same time so that the pollinators can cross-pollinate between the two trees. That's really, really important. The design I've chosen for my espalier is a simple cordon style. It has a couple names, but it's basically the idea that you're growing one central trunk and then 3 to 4 sets of horizontal branches all along that main trunk. Another really common one is a fan design, which is kind of what it sounds like. It's a central shorter trunk, but then you're training several branches to fan out along a fence or a wall. And there's many other designs you can do, but two of the simplest are the fan and the cordon. So that's what I've chosen to do. The next thing to think about is the location for your espalier. So you can actually grow an espalier in a freestanding trellis, but you'll need something really, really sturdy to anchor the trellis wires to, so that way it can support the tree. So some really tall, thick posts that you anchor well into the ground. Otherwise, it's going to tip over and just not support the weight of the tree as it grows. But for the most part, the simplest thing to do is to choose a section of fence or blank wall that you can tie the trellis into, and that's what I've done. I've also chosen a section of my fence that's south-facing. Design. Eye screws are simply screws that have a little loop on the end so we can thread the wire through. You also need 4 turnbuckles. Turnbuckles are the things that allow you to tighten the wire and let it be nice and flat and straight and strong. I also used a piece of 2x4 to put a central kind of support post on my fence. Since my fence is in 8-foot sections, I needed something in the middle to tie the middle of the tree to. So that's optional. You may or may not need that. I've also used a 6-foot bamboo stake, and I'll explain why later. And you'll also need some plant ties or twine or something that you can actually train the tree to the trellis. And then of course there's pruning the tree itself, so make sure you have some clean, sterilized, sharp, heavy-duty pruning shears. And now we finally get to build this trellis. the first thing to do is measure and mark up exactly where you're gonna put all of the eye screws and the middle part of the trellis. So like I mentioned, if your fence is like mine, I've got 8-foot sections of fence. So the first thing we did was screw in a 2x4 right in the middle, right at the 4-foot mark. And that's gonna actually be the central part where I plant my tree. That's gonna be the central vertical wire. On that central point, you're gonna measure up and mark each place that you're gonna be putting one of those horizontal tiers. So for me, I decided that was gonna be 18 inches, 36 inches, and 54 inches. So each of the tiers is 18 inches apart, which I think is just about right. You want plenty of space for the apples to grow and for there to be airflow around the tree. And then you're gonna do the exact same thing on either end of the trellis, to the left and to the right. Measure up 18, 36, and 54 inches and put a little mark. Now pre-drill a hole in the fence at all of the marks that you made. This is gonna be where the eye screws go. On that central post, you do need one extra hole at the top and at the very bottom, and this is where you're gonna anchor your wire to for that vertical wire in the center. And then it's just a matter of going along and putting an eye screw in each one of those holes that you drilled. Along the center, I found it helpful to angle the eye screws diagonally, so that way you can have a wire running both horizontally and vertically through each one of those eye screws. And now it's finally time to attach the wires to the trellis. I found it helpful to unroll the wire along the ground and pre-cut it to about the right length. Then it's just a matter of threading it through one of the eye screws on the very end of the trellis. You fold it over and then wrap it around really securely so that it stays put. Then thread your wire through that central eye screw and all the way over to the other end. And this is where you need the turnbuckle, because that's gonna allow you to straighten and tighten the wire. So thread the wire through the other end, twist it to the turnbuckle, and use the turnbuckle to tighten the wire along its entire length. Then repeat the same process for the other 2 tiers. And then finally, attach the central vertical wire the same way. We're just about ready to actually plant our trees, but before we do that, this is where you need the bamboo stake. I didn't want to tie the tree directly into the wire. I didn't want to run the risk of either pulling the wire away from the fence as the tree grew or damaging the central trunk, especially while it's young. So I used zip ties to attach a bamboo stake to this central vertical wire, and that is what I'm going to tie my tree into. Now we finally get to plant our tree. And this is pretty standard procedure, except a couple things about placement. So first, dig a hole about 2 to 3 times the width of your pot, or if you're planting a bare root tree, it only needs to be about 1 foot to 2 feet wide. If you're putting in any soil amendments, now's the time. Go ahead and mix in any compost or soil conditioners that you want to add into your native soil. So when you place the tree in the hole, situate the root ball so that the very top of the root ball is just at ground level. You don't want to bury the root ball too deep. This is a really common mistake when planting fruit trees. So pay attention to where that is. If it's a bare root tree, the thing you want to look for is where the graft union is. That's the spot where the root stock is grafted to the scion, to the actual tree variety that you bought. And most apple trees that you're going to buy at a nursery are grafted onto root stock that is dwarf or semi-dwarf, which is a good thing for espalier because it means it's going to be easier to train the tree to stay small. The other thing to look for in positioning is you want the trunk to be placed no more than 6 inches away from that bamboo stake that we placed, because you want it to be close enough that you can tie it into the stake and keep it nice and sturdy and centered. So aim for it to be less than 6 inches. I tried to place it about 4 inches away from the wire or the stake, and that was just about right. And now we've reached the big moment. It's time to prune the tree. this is a little scary. Now, if you've bought a tree that is in the shape of a whip, which is simply just one central trunk without any side branches, then it's a little bit easier to do. But if you've bought a young tree like mine that's about a year old and it's already starting to branch out, it can be a little bit intimidating to make a cut like this. But don't worry, I'm going to guide you through it. Here's what you're looking for. So you want to find the buds that are positioned right around that bottom tier wire. So here's what's going to happen. When you cut the main trunk of the tree, it sends a signal to the tree to start growing again from the buds nearest to that cut. So the very top bud is going to grow, and that's going to become your new vertical trunk all the way up to the next tier of wire. And then the buds below that will send out branches, and those are the ones you're going to train horizontally along the wires. So what you're looking for is a bud that's essentially just above your mid to late November, so we have a little bit more time. But I wanted to show you how my apple tree is doing at this point, just after its first growing season. Notice I said apple tree and not apple trees. Unfortunately, the other tree, the Einsheimer, had some transplant shock and it didn't make it. So that means I'm gonna have to replant another apple tree next spring. I'll probably get the same variety. That's gonna put one of the Espaliers a year behind the other, but that shouldn't affect overall long-term how well the trees produce or how all of this goes, because I'm really happy with how much happened this year. I wasn't sure what to expect. You can see right here, this was my initial cut, that very first cut that I made, just leaving this bottom part here. And these are the two initial branches that grew off. And I have started tying them gently into the horizontal wire that I made. And then this central shoot grew up really vigorously, all the way to the point where I had to cut it again. And that happened sometime in midsummer. So that's what I did here, and so we have another central shoot growing up and two new horizontal shoots that I was able to start training. And now if you see, this central shoot again grew super vigorously, so I went ahead and cut it again just below the top wire. And we've got the beginnings of some new shoots coming, and I think we've got time to get these started. So I've got a really good start for my apple tree. And I think the thing with Espalier is that you want to take your time with it to get the shape established just right. And if, you know, my tree is still too young to put out any blossoms, but if any blossoms come next year, I'm going to pull them off because I really want to make sure the tree puts all of its energy toward growing a good root system so that later on it can stay healthier and can bounce back from any problems, but also growing these branches and training the branches the way that I want. Let me show you how easy it is to tie the branches onto the wires. I found this really cool product. It's actually by Velcro, and it's plant ties or plant tie tape. And it's a really gentle Velcro where one side is very soft and the other side is slightly grippy. And it's super easy to do. All you have to do, snip off a little piece, and then the soft side goes in toward the branch that you want to tie. But all you have to do, get your branch in place, and then just wrap it around, and it sticks to itself. Look, I even got too much. I could use far less than that. But that makes a really gentle, loose tie that's not gonna break, and it's not gonna hurt my tree as it grows. If this is the kind of growth that happened this year, I'm really excited to see what happens with my Espalier next year. And I have to be honest, I'm eyeing other parts of my fence to see, like, what else can I Espalier? Where else can I put one of these? So who knows, we'll see what happens. But I do have some resources on the Fruit Grove that I'm going to link to below that walks through all of the materials and steps that we used for this project. I hope you're not intimidated by the idea of starting a backyard Espalier. It's actually After some initial setup, admittedly, but it's actually really satisfying garden job. It's so cool to see it grow and form this shape, and it's gonna be amazing when I get a great crop of apples from this really small area. So let me know in the comments if you give it a try or if you have any questions about this process or about the things that we use to set it up. And I hope this inspires you to go out and plan your own apple espalier in your small backyard space. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.